Γεια σας, hello, I'm Alkistis, and I'd like to welcome you to the Hellenic Wellness Movement. The Agora was the civic center of Athens, but it wasn't only frequented by politicians and city officials. The area housed a market where people could purchase food and other goods from merchants. It was also frequented by philosophers who used the public space to establish schools and pass on their knowledge. Religion had its place as well. Temples dedicated to Hephaestus and Apollo were located in the Agora, alongside the altar of the 12 gods and the monuments of the eponymous heroes. The painted stoa or stoa picile derived its name from the panel paintings on its wall. The paintings were created in the 5th century BC by famous artists like Polygnotos. Greek military victories like the Battle of Marathon were depicted. The stoa served as a public meeting place for citizens, for philosophers who used the space to pass on their teachings. In 301 BC, the philosopher Zeno of Kithion chose the Stoa Picile as the location for his school of philosophy, appropriately dubbed Stoicism. Trade in the Agora was supervised by magistrates. There were 5 agoronomi who kept order in the market, controlled the quality of goods, and collected market dues. This provided revenue to the city and helped pay the magistrates. The market benefited everyone. Customers bought what they needed, merchants made their living, and city officials received the money they needed to keep the wheels of democracy turning. The original temple of Apollo Patros was built around 535 BC by Pisistratos, but was destroyed later by the Persians in their invasions a few decades later. It long remained in ruins except for the altar, which was left standing as a reminder. Eventually, a new temple was built in the 4th century BCE. Inside was a statue made by Ephranor and the same artist who painted the Stoa of Zeus. The temple held special significance in Athens as it was connected to the origin of the city. The name Patros means fatherly, referenced the belief that Apollo was the father of Ion, founder of the Ionian Greeks, from whom all Athenians descended. The temple of Hephaestus overlooks the Agora from the Kolonos Agoreos hill. Today, it is one of the best preserved temples in Greece, owing to its conversion to a church during the Middle Ages. The temple was dedicated not only to Hephaestus, the god of metallurgy, but the goddess Athena Ergani, goddess of arts and crafts. Nearly every part of the Hephaestion was lavishly decorated with depictions of mythological events like the labors of Theseus. The Theseus scenes gave the temple the nickname Theseion, a name that lives on today. The Vouleftirio was another building in the Agora that contributed to the democratic process. It housed the Athenian Council of Citizens, the Vouli. This council of 500 was composed of 50 members from each Greek tribe, all of whom served 1 year's term, chosen by a lot. Every month, one group of 50 was chosen to lead the Vouli's executive committee, the Prytanisses. They met once a month and called meetings Vouleftirio, where they spent their time discussing issues. The Prytanion was one of the most important buildings in the Agora, as it was the headquarters of the Prytanis. The Prytanis was the executive committee of the Vouli who ran the city's daily operations. The Prytanis dined in the Prytanion, and 17 of them slept on site to ensure there were always officials available to deal with anything that came up. Also housed official weights and measures of the city. The fire of Estia provided the sacred fire for all public sacrifices was also located there. The Helia was the most important court in Athens, and presided over the group of judges called Eliastis. Judging was a regular part of Athenian citizens' life, and trials happened almost every day. Heliasts were chosen randomly based on two factors. First, they were on the official list of 6,000 potentials. Second, they were present at court on the day of the trial. A stipend of 2 ovolus was established by Pericles to compensate for the loss of work while the Elastis was on duty and to encourage participation in the judiciary process. In the Agora, the Athenian could buy and sell many different products. The permanent retail market was divided into sections according to the category of merchandise. Merchants and craftsmen who worked in the market could be citizens, foreigners, or even freed slaves. They sold everything from food and clothes to jewelry and slaves. With so much variety, competition was fierce, and that competition was helped to regulate the market prices. The Elea wasn't the only court in Athens. This other court was located next to the South Stoa. Historians believed it to be a court based on the discovery of a nearby box. These ballots used by jurors to give their verdicts. The reason trials were so common in Athens might have been related to the democratic regime, which promoted the individual's right to demand reparations for injustice. However, not all legal matters were settled in this fashion. If a claim was small enough, it was settled individually. Public trials were reserved for more serious offenses like murder, theft, and political crimes. The mint was where the cities made its coinage. It is believed that Athens' mint was in the city's agora, as modern excavations show small disc-shaped pieces of metals that would be turned into coins. Much of the silver required for minting was from Lavrio. Athens was dependent on the mines of Lavrio, and they lost this during the Peloponnesian War. The Athenians were destitute and had to melt down a gold statue of Athena. So silver mines were extremely rare in ancient Greece, which only increased their importance. Athens started exploiting the Lavrio silver mines to produce its currency. Production of mines exploded around 485 BC when a special vein was found. The mine's abundant silver made Athens one of the wealthiest cities in Greece. They also provided the resources necessary to build a fleet large enough to defeat the Persians in the Battle of Salamis. In short, the Lavrio mines played an integral part in the emergence of Athens as a Greek superpower. Exploiting the mines' resources required a lot of labor. To meet this requirement and save costs, Athens leased out mining concessions to its citizens, who had their slaves do most of the work alongside poor day laborers. In the 5th century BC alone, there were anywhere from 10 to 30,000 people toiling in the mines of Lavrio. Together, the workers managed to produce an estimated 20 tons of silver per year. The Acropolis has gone through many changes in its long history. It began as a simple rock, was settled as early as the Neolithic period, and became a fortress in the Mycenaean period. Stone buildings started appearing in the 7th century BCE, but the famous structures whose ruins remained visible were mainly from the period of the 5th century BCE. The location of the Acropolis is closely tied with Athens as its foundation myth. Supposedly, it was the site where Athena and Poseidon competed for the city's patronage. This connection gave the Acropolis a sacred aura and is considered the religious center of Greece. The Temple of Athena, Nike, was built on the remains of the old fortifications from the Mycenaean era. Worship at the temple can be traced back to 6th century BCE. During the Greco-Persian Wars, it was destroyed and was rebuilt after the Peloponnesian Wars. Given the name Athens Nike, meaning Athens of Victory, as it was hoped that Athens would win. Unusually, the temple depicts historical scenes and battles of Persians and mythologically inclined art of Greek heritage. The temple's priestesses were chosen randomly among Athenians and received a salary. The Acropolis was built over a long period. In the 5th century BCE, though, that the Acropolis received the most significant improvements. This period was an extremely prosperous time for Athens, both financially and culturally. With a booming economy bolstered by trade in the Lavrios silver mines, Pericles, the leader of Athens, financed a huge project to rebuild the city's citadel. He enlisted the help of renowned artists like Phidias and the architect Iktinos and Kallikratis. Together, they erected buildings like the Parthenon and the Propylea Gateway. Pericles' goal was to make the Acropolis into a glorious monument to the gods and to the mortal Athenians. Behind the Propylea was the giant bronze statue of Athena Promachos, Athena who fights in the front lines, in other words. That name reflected the spear and shield and statue that were held in her hands. It was erected in the 5th century BCE by Phidias. According to the inscription, it took 9 years to make and cost almost 500,000 drachmae. At approximately 10 meters tall, the statue was apparently so large that Pausanias claimed his helmet and the tip could see to the Sea of Cape Sunio. The ornamentation on the statue's shield was engraved by metalsmiths. The archiphori were young girls between the ages of 7 and 11 who were in charge of special rites. A list of 4 girls were drafted to the Assembly of Citizens, which High Magistrate the Archon Vasilis chose, serving as archiphore. The girls lived in the house on the Acropolis. They were in charge of carrying sacred objects and weaving the peplos of Athena. The peplos was a sacred robe offered to Athena during the Panathenea, a festival in her honor. The Erechtheion was an atypical temple. It was depicted not only in Athens polis, but also Kekrops, the mythical founder of Athens, and his son Erchikes. Even Poseidon, the sea god who challenged Athena for possession of the city. The temple was divided. The eastern part housed the statue dedicated to Athena, while the western section belonged to Poseidon and Erechthos. Meanwhile, King Kekrop's grave was believed to be under the Caryatid porch. Under the temple was a crypt that is said to contain the snakes of Athena. The snakes may have had a sweet tooth because the priestesses of Athena allegedly fed them honey cakes. The Parthenon is one of the most well-known buildings in the world and an enduring symbol of ancient Greek civilization. While it is located at the Acropolis, the building is not a traditional temple. It was built by the sculptor Phidias and the architects Kallikratis and Iktinos. The monument was the glory of the city of Athens. The glory is evident in its many carvings. One of the most carved monuments in Greek architecture and Parthenon's decoration depicts several mythological scenes. These include birth of Athena, the fight against Poseidon for the patronage of Athens, the gods' battle with the giants, and the procession of the great Panathenea. The Parthenon's inner chamber, or cella, contained the massive statue of Athena that was considered to be Phidias' greatest masterpiece. The statue of Chryselephantyne, a combination of gold and ivory. To justify the steep cost of the construction, Pericles told Athena that the statue was gold reserved, disassembled it in times of distress. The cella was allegedly contained a pool whose main purpose was to control the room's humidity, which helped preserve the statue's ivory. Athens' treasure was located in the Parthenon, where it believed to protected Athena by Athena herself. The treasury contained objects of great value acquired from different conquests, and as well as a mass of minting silver coins. Pericles also decided to move the entirety of the Delian League's treasure to the Parthenon. This was a great testament to Athens' power over the rest of Greece. The riches were divided in two parts, Demosia, which belonged to the city, and Hierachrymata, which were dedicated to the goddess and only used for religious purposes. The Odeon of Pericles was built sometime between 440 and 430 BCE. The building was commissioned by Pericles for use during the Panathenea festival. The Odeon was a venue for poetry readings, political rallies, and philosophical performances. According to ancient sources, the original design of the Odeon was inspired by the tent of the Persian king Xerxes, a spoil of war of the Athenians salvaged after their decisive victory in Salamis in 480 BC. The building's roof was made of timber. In the sense, the Odeon was both a triumphant symbol of Athens and an insult to the Persian enemies. The structure was considered one of the grandest architectural accomplishments of ancient Athens. Philosophy comes from the Greek word philosophia, or love of wisdom. This concept was in direct contrast with philochrimatia, love of money, or philithymia, love of honor. As the second half of the 5th century BCE, Athens was known as a Greek capital of philosophy. In the rise of democracy, there was increasing need for education beyond the basic subjects of elementary school. Athenian citizens needed to be able to participate in various functions of the democratic state, such as being elected for office, proposing new laws, engaging in military decisions, or simply for defending their rights. Originally, Athens had no official school buildings for higher education. Sophists and philosophers taught in their private homes or public spaces like the theater. To recruit young pupils for long-term curricula, there were also had classes in gymnasia. Athens underwent physical training. The Kynosarchos was a sanctuary to Iraklis, located at the center of Athens. In the beginning 4th century BC, Antisthenes used this sanctuary as a teaching place, teaching his philosophy, aptly named cynicism. Any free citizen was allowed to involve themselves in the Athenian democratic process. However, to truly influence the flow of politics, their speech and rhetoric skills had to become impeccable. As a result, many sophists taught subjects like logic, reason, and eloquence. These were meant to help students achieve arete, or excellence. But this specific concept of excellence was often challenged, especially by other philosophers. For example, Plato, Socrates, Isocrates preferred a more moral approach and argued that rhetoric should be used as a means to serve the greater good. Socrates and Plato went even further, declaring that only philosophy and wisdom were not only useful tools, but ethical virtues. Ancient Greek philosophy was a multidisciplinary in nature. In addition to wisdom and logic, philosophers also studied and taught geometry, math, music, and even medicine. For example, the philosopher Prodicus wrote on a treatise called On Human Nature, where he outlined various explanations of human physiology. Philosophy's influence was great enough to affect the medicine. Hippocratic physicians were known to incorporate philosophical on airs, seemed to influence by pre-Socratic theories of air being the first principle in the universe. The famed philosopher Socrates had an ambiguous relationship with sophists. In Plato's dialogue, Socrates is portrayed as being in the constant opposition with the famous sophists of the time. Aristophanes' comedies, The Clouds, meanwhile, depicts Socrates as a sophist himself, constantly demanding payment for his teachings. Socrates was in fact very poor and made no money off his teachings. He also differed from sophists in that while they only taught to aristocrats, Socrates taught to everyone, regardless of their station. Unfortunately, his controversial ideas and practices did not sit well with the elite. Philosophy was not only a collection of ideas, but a way of life. According to philosopher Pierre Hadot, his ancient counterparts had a daily regimen of spiritual exercises to combat their passions, doubts, and illusory beliefs. These exercises included meditation on death, contemplation on nature, or speaking with a friend or a mentor. Philosophers also followed specific dress codes and diets. They were also part of a community of masters and students. These communities were created and strengthened in schools. Plato founded such a school in the 4th century BCE when he purchased a property in the grove just outside of Athens. The school was designed to groom students into philosopher citizens who would eventually rule the city in a measured and wise manner. It followed on its rules and opened both to male and female disciples. The Athenian assembly was known as the Ecclesia. It met at the Pnyx 40 times a year to discuss various civic matters, and each session usually lasted a few hours. The word Pnyx means to be packed together. This was probably in reference to the fact that during the meetings of the Ecclesia, the location would be filled to its capacity with citizens packed in practically shoulder to shoulder. All male citizens were allowed to directly participate in the democratic process. Those over 20 years old had the right to speak and vote, while others were elected to higher positions and magistrate. In total, there were approximately 30,000 citizens in Athens in the classical period. To draft and adopt decrees, 6,000 of them had to attend the meeting. Citizens came from all over Attica's 10 districts to attend the meetings of the Ecclesia. The meeting was presided over by an executive council called Prytanis. Every session began with a sacrifice to Zeus Agoreos, the patron. During the meeting, citizens delivered speeches from the Pnyx's platform on whatever issues the city faced. Afterwards, the issue was voted on with a show of hands. The Ecclesia made important decisions about subjects like grain importation, expenses, and declarations of war. While they could not directly enact laws, they had a say in appointing Athens legislators, which gave them a large role in shaping the city's daily operations. While some citizens only participated in the sessions of the Ecclesia, others could become more involved in democracy as magistrates. Magistrates were elected from among Athenian citizens. They were often successful orators and charismatic politicians, and held much more sway over important decisions than the average citizen. One of the most famous magistrates was Pericles, who was so popular he held his position for 15 years. In theory, every Athenian citizen over the age of 20 had the right to participate in the assembly. However, some of them lived far from the city, and others could not financially afford to miss a day of work to attend the meetings. For this reason, the city introduced a special allowance called misthos ekklesiastikos in the 4th century BC, meant to encourage participation. Originally it was 2 ovals, but the politician Cleon raised it to 3. Athens introduced several innovations that heavily influenced modern society, including theater, architecture, and philosophy. However, their greatest contribution was their democratic government, which introduced concepts of a city ruled by its citizens. The decision to adopt democracy as a government, a choice in 508 BCE, shaped civilization as we know it today.